Time is running out. A countdown that began 26,000 years ago is approaching the 0 hour.
We're in this transformational process, and right now is decision time for our species.
Does an ancient Mayan prophecy hold the secret to our planet's future?
When the 13th heaven cycle is over, then will come the complete destruction of all we are and know.
Is the year 2012 the dawn of a new era?
A lot of people have a sense that something is expected to come in that year.
Or is it the end of the world?
In 2012, our complete civilization will be destroyed in less than a few hours.
Plasma, the fourth state of matter, and a major component of the sun. Plasma is the specialty of Aerospace Consulting Corporation in Albuquerque, New Mexico. When journalist Lawrence Joseph became involved with the company, he had no way of knowing it would introduce him to an ancient prophecy. That's time has almost come.
I became interested in 2012 through a complete quirk of fate. The principal scientist for the plasma physics company that I work with, his name is Roger Remy, kept bugging me, and he said the sun was having a breakdown, was behaving strangely, was in some sort of crisis.
The source of the behavior is solar storms known as sunspots.
Sunspots follow 11-year cycles, which we've been tracing almost back to Galileo, and there are times when it's supposed to be stormy and times when it's supposed to be calm. And this was stormy weather when it was supposed to be calm. Typically what happens, there's a sunspot. The billion tons of protons and other radiation that issues from this explosion takes a couple of days, hits the Earth. In January 2005, a coronal mass ejection issued from the sun that hit us not in 2 or 3 days, but in 30 minutes.
"2005 is one of the stormiest years in the planet's history, climaxing in September with the worst hurricanes on record.
The one thing I knew for sure, because it was the consensus of solar physicists, is that the next climax in solar activity, the next peak in storms, would come in 2012.
Joseph discovers a wonderland of essays and editorials, blogs and bulletins that offer a range of viewpoints on 2012.
Underlying them all was not solar physics, but was this ancient Mayan prophecy that we would complete the end of a great, great cycle of time on December 21st, 2012.
The Mayan civilization of Central America made its greatest advances in art, architecture, and mathematics more than 1,000 years before the Spanish conquest of the 16th century. But perhaps their greatest accomplishment was in astronomy. With their amazing understanding of the cosmos, they could only observe with the naked eye.
They were charting the movement of the solar system, the sun, and all the planets at least 1,200 years ago.
The Maya used their understanding of the cosmos to create an interconnected system of intricate schedules and almanacs based on spiritual cycles as well as seasonal ones. One of the most frequently used calendars is a 260-day calendar, which follows the appearance of Venus in the night sky and is equivalent to the length of time a child is in utero.
They see their cycles very differently, and they like to connect with the way we live.
Lawrence was especially interested in the long count calendar, used to track 26,000 years of human evolution. Composed of 5 lesser cycles of 5,172 years, it was also divided into 400-year segments known as Baktuns. The world is currently in the final Baktun cycle, predicted by the Maya as a time when materialism would triumph over humankind's oneness with nature.
The Maya seem to have a model of time which is more kind of like a harmonic structure, and where there are these synchronicities and these patterns of synchronicity that sort of develop over large amounts of time.
Their idea for this particular long count calendar is that when the sun eclipses the center point of the Milky Way on December 21st, 2012, that will signal the end of a great 26,000-year cycle. They have a belief that when a great cycle ends or begins, the changes are manifest, and it affects both human beings and the planet Earth as a whole.
How that will play out is a matter of much debate, because the prophecy did not specify. There is even debate about whether the prediction can be called a prophecy.
It's not a prophecy, it's a calculation. We are talking about the complete annihilation of our civilization.
According to the prophecies of the ancient Maya, the planet Earth is approaching a period of upheaval as it moves from one great celestial cycle to the next. Some believe that the date of transition, December 21st, 2012, is actually doomsday, when the world comes to an end. Author Lawrence Joseph's interest was sparked by the link between intense sunspot activity and the catastrophic climactic events of 2004 and 2005, and the fact that the next solar climax is in 2012.
The coincidence between the solar climax of 2012 and the ancient Mayan prophecy of 2012 interested me, and I thought, I want to know more.
Joseph found Don Carlos Barrios, a practicing Mayan shaman living in Guatemala.
When I began to study in the university in Guatemala, and I find the elder he beginning to teach me, and he introduced me into the Mayan work, to the Mayan tradition. I went deeper into the Mayan sacred calendar, and I began to receive a lot of the different prophecies, and one of them is the famous prophecy for the 2012.
Don Carlos and his brother Gerardo, also a Mayan shaman, explained to Lawrence that the long count calendar was designed to highlight and prophesy important turning points in evolution, including the end of Mayan civilization.
It predicted that a large butterfly would come and decimate the Mayan kingdom. Must have been skepticism with that prediction, but the butterfly turned out to be the sails of Cortez's ships.
According to the shamans, we are now in a transition period between cycles, and the entire planet will have to adapt to changes that have already begun.
The Mother Earth needs purification because we are immersed into the materialistic world. We forget what is the meaning of to be a human being.
Indigenous cultures often talk about not wanting to do anything that will harm the prospects of like the 7th generation ahead of you. Somehow, we got possessed by our technology and our ability to manipulate matter, and we forgot about consequences.
These consequences include a series of cataclysmic events, according to Belgian author and survivalist Patrick Gerald.
2012 is the ultimate destructor of everything. All the wars from the past, it even won't compare to 1% of the destruction that will happen in 2012.
Until then, Patrick can only warn of what will happen when violent sunstorms trigger a massive polar shift on Earth.
These solar flares will send trillions of particles to the Earth. it is my expectation that the South Pole will go this way and the North Pole that way very fast.
What will follow is a domino effect that triggers one disaster after another.
First, you have large earthquakes that will flatten out all buildings on the whole Earth. Volcanoes worldwide will be activated and they will throw large particles into the air. Then the flood will start. In the Bible was stated that the highest mountains were covered with water. The same principle will be in 2012.
While the world may choose to disregard the counsel of shamans or the dire warnings of a survivalist, there is scientific study in progress that seems to correspond to concerns surrounding the Mayan prophecy.
Clearly, there's a relationship between what emanates from the sun and weather on the Earth.
Dr. Friedman Freund, a senior researcher with NASA, has also studied the effects of solar activity as a way to predict earthquake probability.
If you look over 100 years of seismic data and you plot the total energy that the Earth is releasing in form of earthquakes and plot them against times of solar activity as the sun goes through its cycle, you see there is a striking collaboration, just like putting two hands on top of each other.
If there is a correlation between sunspot and seismic activity, could the extreme solar maximum that scientists expect in 2012 have the same impact on the Earth's magnetic field as Patrick Gerald predicts? The current cycle of the Mayan long count calendar coincides with the decimation of life on Earth. Those who see the calendar as a doomsday prophecy link the end of the world directly to a reversal of the north and south magnetic poles sparked by increased solar activity in 2012. Prophecy or not, there is concern among scientists about how this extreme sunspot activity will affect the Earth's magnetic field. Our primary defense against solar radiation is diminishing.
The magnetic field of the Earth goes through fluctuation. There will be a period of time, maybe a few years, maybe a few decades, maybe even a century or longer, where the Earth's magnetic field will be very weak or vanishing.
As the sun apparently is becoming stronger and throwing more at us, our shields are weakening.
As part of his research, Lawrence Joseph discovered that it is more than a coincidence. At the Magnetic Observatory in Hermanus, South Africa, geophysicists confirmed that the Earth's magnetic field is diminishing. They also pointed out a 100,000-mile crack in the field between South Africa and Brazil, known as the South Atlantic Anomaly.
When the magnetic field opens, we are vulnerable. My most specific worry for 2012 is that the satellite system will come under some sort of an attack and that we will not be prepared to adjust and compensate for this.
Solar blasts through a weakened magnetic shield could knock out power grids, scramble communications, and further widen holes in the atmospheric ozone.
There will be an increased level of ionizing radiation reaching the surface of the Earth. That will cause DNA damage, both to us and other living organisms.
Patrick Gerald believes the changes in the Earth's magnetic shield support the prediction of a cataclysmic pole shift.
There is evidence that the pole shift is imminent, Because the last 100 years, the strength of the polar field of the Earth has decreased 10%. And the last 2,000 years, it has decreased 60%.
While there is evidence in solidified lava flows that polar shifts have occurred in the distant past, scientists do not agree that the entire process could take place in the 3-day span that Patrick Sherrill predicts.
We are moving at more than the speed of sound relative to the point fixed in space. This very, very fast spinning top cannot change very easily.
According to Dr. Freund, a much more immediate and likely catastrophe is just waiting to happen.
The most dangerous event is that the Earth is hit by a major asteroid or meteorite that could do sufficient harm to wipe out at least advanced life on Earth.
Some scientists believe the kind of catastrophic event described by Patrick Sherrill may not come from outer space, but from within the Earth's own inner space, and it's already 40,000 years overdue. Yellowstone National Park, home to Old Faithful. The geyser is one of many geothermal vents that appear harmless on the surface, but hint at something more ominous below.
Supervolcanoes, also known as calderas, are under the ground. The best known supervolcano is Yellowstone, which is gigantic. It's about the size of the city of Tokyo, full of magma, ready at some point to explode.
These volcanoes, when they erupt, their ash clouds reach altitudes on the order of 12, 15 kilometers. And they distribute this dust cloud globally.
It's not just the kaboom. It's the ramifications, blotting out the sunlight for a couple of years. And the growing seasons are not just shortened, they just don't exist. When you have famine, you have disease. When you have famine and disease, you have governments fall and you have all sorts of bad stuff.
Supervolcanoes and solar outbursts, polar shifts and accidental asteroids. Are they scientific incidents? Or are they somehow tied to a master plan set in motion thousands of years ago?
Perhaps the only function of it is to spur our curiosity and to heighten our awareness and to just get us to organize better and prepare and be less selfish. Or maybe, as the Maya believed, something is coming.
You can't protect yourself against this cataclysm. You can't escape at that moment. You can only try to survive.
December 21st, 2012. For some, it is quite literally the day the world as we know it comes to an end.
You will be brought back to Stone Age, worse than the Stone Age. In the Stone Age, you had trees, you had food. There won't be anything left from our civilization, nothing. We have to restart, we have to survive, we have to rebuild.
While they agree that the possibility of earthly catastrophes will always exist, most scientists don't anticipate the kind of cataclysm that Patrick Sherrill expects on December 21st, 2012.
With due respect and true admiration for the knowledge that past generations have accrued over many generations, when they try to apply this knowledge into and project it into the future, the less accurate their prediction or foreboding becomes.
Perhaps the ancient prophecy is more a blueprint for an apocalypse in the making, whether it falls on a particular day or not.
We're already in an unfolding crisis, and unless there's a change in direction for global civilization, that cataclysm is only going to become more and more impactful on everybody's life, whether you're the most affluent person or the poorest person.
Those steeped in the Mayan tradition agree and see 2012 as a transition from the end of one cycle to the hopeful new beginning of the next.
It's not the end of the human race. It's a period of peace and understanding and love, and we can grow. We are here now waiting for the 2012, and this is not the way. Nothing is going to happen in 2012. The problem is right now.
We're in this transformational process, and right now is decision time for our species.
We can only hope that this new era will indeed herald a new enlightenment, in which human beings see their world through new eyes and open hearts. If we fail, Mayan elders foresee a future that offers as much hope for survival as 2012 offers Patrick Gerald.
This is the moment of the real destruction of the environment, and if we don't change, if we don't stop the pollution, if we don't stop the abuse, a big portion of the humanity can be disappeared.
Like Carlos Barrios, Lawrence Joseph doesn't believe that a big switch thrown in 2012 will suddenly transform the world. There will be change, however, forced upon us by powers greater than ours.
We have not had the chance to accumulate the wisdom that I think we will need to respond to political, economic catastrophes in other spheres. And that's what my particular fear is, that 2012 could somehow be the year when that starts or it sets off.
We want to have a new civilization with new principles. We know how humans think and work. We will see. If you don't try it, nothing will happen.
The best description really, I think, does come from Gerardo Barrios, who said that we're entering a period of darkness, that we know the light will return, but we don't know when, and we don't know what will transpire in the transition. It will be the birth of a new era, but like any other birth, it will be accompanied by lots of blood and pain.
The book of Revelation foretells the end of times, when a powerful figure takes peace from the world.
When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned as black as dark sackcloth, and the whole moon became like blood. The stars in the sky fell to the earth like unripe figs, shaken loose from the tree in a strong wind. Then the sky was divided, like a torn scroll curling up, and every mountain and island was moved in its place.
Could the prophecy from Revelation be a prediction of a nuclear holocaust?
After the successful terrorist attack, this 9/11 Commission was established, and their principal conclusion was that 9/11 occurred because of a, quote, failure of imagination. It meant that for most Americans, it was just inconceivable that terrorists would kill thousands of people in a single stroke. Now, for most people today, a nuclear 9/11, that is a real mushroom cloud enveloping a city, is as unimaginable as 9/11 was before 9/11. Any failure of imagination to conceive that a group who has done 9/11, who's been working at this very earnestly, who's tried to buy nuclear material, who's had conversations about buying nuclear bombs, might be planning a nuclear terrorist attack. Not to recognize this as a real possibility, I think would be a shameful failure.
A nuclear holocaust has been a possibility since the Cold War. But is this future etched in stone, or is it subject to the will of humankind? Will we create this disaster through arrogance, greed, hate, and anger? Or will we prevent it through diligence, foresight, and the indomitable human spirit?
Osama bin Laden has challenged the community of terrorists, especially Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, to trump 9/11. So think about that. You're going to do something more spectacular and more deadly than 9/11. Well, there's a few things up there. At the top of that list is a mushroom cloud enveloping New York or some other city.
When 9/11 happened, no one knew what hit us. It is true that in the hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S. government, there were some who had speculated and had some evidence that this may take place. But the institution of the U.S. government was unprepared for this attack. The question was what was going to happen next.
One imagines a 10-kiloton blast. If it were driven in the back of an SUV here to Times Square and exploded right now, everything out to a third of a mile would disappear instantaneously, vaporized with this huge release of heat. That would take you all the theater district down to the Empire State Building. Then this ball of fire would be the next wave and would carry both blast and fire out to the UN building at the east side, to the Lincoln Center on the west side. So you could have 500,000 people killed in the first blast, and several 100,000 people die in the hours and days that followed.
Osama bin Laden has publicly declared that he believes it is his religious duty to kill 4 million Americans. Does the future include a nuclear attack? The threat of nuclear weapons destroying cities all over the world, even all of civilization on Earth, was established during the Cold War. But the Cold War is over, and the future of war is uncertain.
During the Cold War, we established mutually assured destruction, MAD, which was actually very stable and, contrary to expectations, worked extremely well in preventing a nuclear war. That sort of deterrent relationship is impossible with a group like Al-Qaeda, who isn't particularly afraid of the consequences of what you might do. And they're prepared to die anyway.
How would they get the bomb? Well, two routes. They could get a bomb that was made by a state, or secondly, they could make what the intelligence community now calls a IND, an improvised nuclear device.
There are two key components to a nuclear device: the mechanism for detonating the bomb and the nuclear fuel for the explosion.
Fortunately, Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda cannot make the core of a nuclear bomb. Only states have made them.
A centrifuge is essential to enriching uranium to the point where it can be used in weapons.
Centrifuges are used to enrich uranium. They remove the uranium-238 from the uranium-235. The 238 is the stuff that goes bang.
It can take thousands of centrifuges to create enough material for a single nuclear weapon. This is impossible for terrorist groups to achieve without the help of a nation-state. Currently, both Iran and North Korea are pursuing nuclear refinement programs. At last count, Iran had as many as 4,000 nuclear centrifuges. It is estimated that it would require 30,000 centrifuges to manufacture sufficient amounts of highly enriched uranium for a nuclear bomb.
That's the good news. The bad news is if they should get a football-sized lump of highly enriched uranium, less than 100 pounds, the rest of the process of making an elementary nuclear bomb is relatively straightforward. If Osama bin Laden succeeded in getting 100 pounds of highly enriched uranium, the rest of the process of making an elementary bomb, hard as it is to believe, is within his capacity. Much simpler than the planning and execution of 9/11. About the fact that Al-Qaeda is seriously seeking to perpetrate what Osama bin Laden has called an American Hiroshima, I don't think anybody in the community has any doubt. The question is, where do they stand in the process of planning that exercise? For anybody that wants to take comfort from the fact that there hasn't been another major successful terrorist attack since 9/11 in the U.S., we should remember that the 9/11 attack was 5 years in the planning.
If you get into theatrics, you're only as good as your last movie. What do you do to top that? Anything less than that, they might just decide to leave it alone, let it go down in history books forever. I would imagine that the first target would be Washington, D.C. A small yield 15 kiloton bomb like Hiroshima or Nagasaki set off between the Pentagon and the White House would probably vaporize both places. You would kill tens of thousands of people. You would wipe out invaluable assets and resources. Communications, intelligence people, the CIA, all that would be gone.
I think in terms of their objective, killing massively is the first, but doing so in a way that is symbolic and is visible and even theatrical also seems to be a significant component.
With the stated mission of killing 4 million Americans, terrorists have two options if they want a nuclear device: build one or acquire one.
I'm far more confident that they can't build one than I am that they can't acquire one. I still think it's unlikely that they can acquire one, but I'm far from certain of it. And that's where the dilemma rests.
The most likely use of a nuclear weapon for nuclear terrorism, I think, would be a weapon that's already been stolen. And the knowledge of a military or scientific person, the knowledge to set it off and the capability of setting it off.
A suitcase bomb is a small device designed to be operated by a special operations, special forces person in what is probably a suicide mission. The fear was, during the 1990s, when the Soviet Union broke down, that these suitcase bombs may have been sold to unknown people. What is frightening of them is they're very difficult to detect. But they're also fairly fragile. And that's what makes them difficult to use. Because knocking them about can simply damage them beyond use. And more important, you won't know until after you flip the switch.
On a Wednesday morning in October 2001, intelligence reports began to surface about a potential threat even greater than 9/11.
Anyone who was not frightened at the time was simply not in touch with reality. And so all of the worst case scenarios were now being examined.
1 month to the day after 9/11, the U.S. actually thought there was now a small nuclear bomb in New York City about to be exploded. And this is the so-called Dragonfire story.
Reasonably credible intelligence emerged that a Soviet-era suitcase bomb had gone missing, and that it might be in the hands of Al-Qaeda. The reason it was so startling is it didn't come from one source. It came from two sources, neither of whom knew each other, but each were corroborating the fact.
There was a real possibility that Al-Qaeda now had a bomb in New York City and was about to explode.
The government divided. Dick Cheney went to one place. He was never in the same place with George Bush, as was the responsible plan. The government became desperate. The terror that George Bush had every morning was that he'd wake up and he would find an American city gone. A great deal of the American response to the 9/11 attacks were not about 9/11 itself. It was what was coming next, and was driven by the intelligence that there may be a nuclear attack. They were so wrong about 9/11 in forecasting it. Perhaps they were wrong in everything else. So the government went to a worst-case scenario. And in going to a worst-case scenario, they reshaped many of the operations of the U.S. government.
Much of the panic about the Dragonfire incident revolved around the question of so-called loose nukes from the former Soviet Union. Questions remain about just where these weapons might surface in the future.
I was in the audience while a State Department official gave an official briefing. There were a minimum of 5,000 Soviet nuclear warheads unaccounted for. The Russians were trying to gather them back in, but their counting methods, according to the State Department official, whose job it was to check these things, said they couldn't account for them.
Scenarios are numerous. Cities like Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Los Angeles would all be vulnerable to the same kind of attack. Seaports could be at greatest risk. Devastation of the Long Beach port in California would have implications far beyond the $100 billion toll of 9/11. The Long Beach refineries, responsible for 1/3 of the fuel west of the Rockies, would mean critical fuel shortages. Stock markets could plummet. Economies could crumble.
The most severe effect would be on civil liberties. Truly all limits in the United States and in other countries as well would be taken off.
In 1947, the board of directors of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists established a symbolic doomsday clock. Over the years, they have changed the setting of the clock to reflect their opinion of how close we may be getting to a nuclear or other catastrophe. Originally set at 7 minutes to midnight, the clock setting has ranged from as much as 17 minutes to midnight down to as little as 2 minutes to midnight. In October 2006, the United States, Russia, Canada, and 9 other countries launched the global initiative to combat nuclear terrorism. The goal of the initiative is to increase the control and protection of nuclear materials and civilian nuclear facilities. Some believe that in spite of best efforts, a nuclear 9/11 borders on the inevitable.
So it's complex. There's positives and there's negatives, but I would say the negatives make me think that likelihood is greater today than it was on 9/11.
The core dilemma of the world today is how do you deal with unlikely catastrophic events? So I will say this is more likely to happen than an asteroid hitting the Earth. We all agree that something should definitely be done about asteroids hitting the Earth, but we don't agree about this.
In my judgment, the likelihood that terrorists successfully explode a nuclear bomb, destroying the heart of one of our great cities, is large. Real, immediate, present, in my best judgment, more likely than not, that is 51% or higher odds in the decade. Warren Buffett, who's a legendary odds maker and is in the reinsurance business, says it's inevitable.
Others disagree.
A nuclear attack is, in my mind, fairly unlikely for a number of reasons. The level of expertise required to determine that that nuclear device is both a nuclear device and functional is not something that Al-Qaeda had built into its organization. And going out and accessing an expert increases the probability of detection and betrayal. This is not a device you toss in your trunk and pick up a couple of years later. These devices need maintenance, they need a controlled environment, and they have a high tendency to fail. At this point, in my view, if Al-Qaeda had a nuclear device, they would have used it. The best way to minimize the threat of a terrorist nuclear attack is to maintain constant vigil over existing nuclear sites and over anyone who has the level of expertise necessary to integrate the production of a nuclear weapon. Watch the nuclear facilities, identify these people, watch them, and that's the best thing you can do.
So I would hope that what people would take away from looking and thinking about this is not to be terrified, to be afraid, but to be motivated to demand that their governments and themselves do the things that we need to do to reduce the likelihood of this to nearly zero.
Al-Qaeda has become a much less credible organization. That's not an accident. It had to do with a set of events that took place where the United States blocked them, disrupted them, and essentially rendered them ineffective. Therefore, at this point, as we like to say, Al-Qaeda used to make history, it now makes videos.
Despite the apparent reduction in Al-Qaeda's strength, the United States government has recognized that their greatest failure leading up to 9/11 was a failure of imagination. As part of the effort to avoid similar failures, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security asked a group of science fiction writers how terrorists might attack in the future.
Sigma is a group of professional science fiction writers who provide pro bono or free consultation on futurism to the government. One time, a member of the National Science Foundation suggested to the forecasting group that virtual reality and nanotechnology, micro machines, would be very important in the future. They literally laughed at him. Science fiction writers have spent our entire careers, literary careers, living in the future, creating futures. We owe it to the rest of mankind to come back and report what we've seen out there.
There's no question but that Al-Qaeda would like to carry out a nuclear attack if it was possible. And the argument that I would have to make is that carrying out a nuclear attack is enormously more difficult than the media and some people might say.
Who can forget those images of the planes crashing into buildings and people hanging onto the ledges? I mean, it was theater beyond imagination. But 300,000 people, even 1 million people. I mean, that's, nobody can psychologically imagine that. I think would be a shameful thing.
Thank you.